All right, g'day guys, Jax Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we are here for another episode of the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. And I have a friend of mine, Rebel Black, here today to share some of her genius, her unique story and journey of what's got her to where she is, and hopefully share some amazing pearls of wisdom with you guys, giving you fresh perspectives of how you as a business owner can work towards creating financial freedom faster. So Rebel, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm fabulous. Thanks, Jackson. Great to be here.
It's fantastic to have you. So tell us a little bit about your story, Rebel. Who are you? What do you do? And what got you to where you are?
Well, big questions. I live in outback New South Wales in a little town called Lightning Ridge, which is roughly 70 kilometres south of the Queensland border and halfway across the state, for those that are interested. It's an opal mining community. I moved here in year 2000 as the editor of the newspaper, which of course doesn't exist anymore. And when you live in a little town, the job opportunities are few and far between. And so at a very young age, I decided that I would start my own business and basically been on the entrepreneurial journey for the last 22 years in that way. And I guess I live in a really remote geography, and that's forced me to use technology in creative ways to think about things differently. I have a very unique perspective, I guess, that's been carved from lots of time with really different people working across communities in different geographic areas and working a lot with First Nations, Indigenous people, and also working with people from lots of multicultural backgrounds. And so I think I've got a really broad perspective on life, as well as spending a lot of time working with government in advocacy and in program development and delivery through different businesses. So I feel really fortunate that I live where I live, because it's made me an early adopter of lots of different things, but also given me great scope to just play and be creative with the work that I do in the world.
I love that, mate. That's fantastic. We really enjoyed our time. We were travelling in the Troopy around Australia, around that kind of New South Wales, Queensland border. And we spent quite a bit of time in we did go to Lightning Ridge. We went to Texas, and it's a really, really cool part of the world. But what's interesting now that we live rurally as well is that the business community operates quite differently. And I think that the business community in rural areas doesn't necessarily get the support that it deserves. So what's been your experience in terms of observing small business owners who have been rurally based, and what's different for them in regards to growing their business?
Well, geography is the first thing. And I think obviously where I live, where, just logistically it's 230 kilometres or 360 kilometres to the nearest airport or the nearest sort of major centre. And we're essentially 9 hours from the coast to drive. So where any of the events or activities or bigger programs are taking place that are being typically available, you've got an incredible expense just to get there right off the bat. And prior to COVID, there was a real resistance to the use of online platforms for meetings and for catch-ups and for gatherings. And so it was always, when you're trying to do business outside of your own local community, it was always like, oh, well, when you're in Sydney, we'll catch up. It's like, well, actually, there's, like $5,000 before I even walk out the door in time and cost. And when you're running a small business, it's capital that you're constantly having to decide, will I or won't I invest in that? And I think the other thing, Jackson, and it's one of the reasons why I created a business called The Rural Woman, which we transitioned to a cooperative in 2 years ago and launched publicly last year, was that all of the voices in business education and in all of the pieces that sit around that are metropolitan and mostly male. And so there's very little capacity for rural businesses to kind of get their head around the advice that they're being given when the context is so vastly different. And so contextualizing knowledge, wisdom, application of understanding of knowledge it's a long stretch for people's brains at times when they're already busy and overwhelmed. And so I think that's a real passion of mine, has been creating the spaces where, for me, particularly women, rural women, could be educated and supported and held accountable by their peers, by other rural women who understand their context and they can look at them and say, oh, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And it's not such a big stretch than some of the other business mentors or advisors that they might be connecting to that have a metropolitan perspective.
I think that makes so much sense, Rebel. And it's been interesting. We've seen, even in our own business, a lot more women from all different backgrounds become more excited and passionate about entrepreneurship and about getting their money in order and taking control of their future, whether it be from a financial standpoint or otherwise. And I think it's like people like you that are really championing this space and allowing people to see, okay, what's truly possible, and elevating that position. So from your perspective, Rebel, what do you think is different, particularly for a rural woman in business, whether it be agribusiness or a business that's located in a rural area? What's really different that you observe?
From a tactical point of view, not much. I mean, that's the reality, that business is business anywhere. The rules of business, to a large extent, don't change. You know, there are basic fundamental principles that are true in all cases. But it is the context that matters. And I think there's also an understanding that, typically, and I am sort of generalizing here, but typically rural audiences tend to be, in some areas, laggard adopters. So they're not necessarily, picking things up quickly and first. And so when you're trying to get started, that's a tough market to kind of break into. And I think the other thing is that rural communities generally have been in decline population-wise, from a service point of view. And so if you're trying to reintroduce something new into a community or bring a service back that has been out of town for a while, it takes a long time, and you really don't get the benefit of economies of scale on any front when you live in a rural or a remote area. So I was just saying, years ago, we opened a cinema. I was saying to someone the other day, it really takes like 7 years, minimum 7 years, that a small business in a rural community will need in order to be able to get legs. And so you've got to be able to financially, emotionally, kind of, physically be able to get yourself through those times, because that's what it takes to help people create new habits, create new buying patterns, to get them through the door. We started a cinema years ago, did a great deal, had these amazing guys we were partnering with, getting like brand new movies out of basically like 2 weeks after they were hitting the cinemas in Sydney. It was extraordinary. And 3 years after we'd closed, I would still have people say to me, oh, I must get out to the cinema one day. And, it's like, well, that would have been good 3 years ago when we were open, but no, not enough people came. And so we closed it. And I think it's when you're in business in rural areas, you've really got to think about your market and think about, can my local market sustain me? Can I earn enough living, full-time in my business from my local area, or do I need to actually build a model that's a hybrid of an online, offline, or where I'm building, as I've done, a completely online business, and then, touch points into the local community so you can stay connected.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. Like, even in our experience, we've been up in Far North Queensland now 18 months. Our local town, Babinda, we've seen businesses go under, and there was a couple of business owners who were quite vocal and obviously very emotional of saying, like, we've been open for years and tried to serve the community, and we haven't got the level of support that we thought we deserved. And it's really challenging, and it's heartbreaking, because these businesses deserve to be able to thrive. But you're right, the economies of scale just aren't there. And I think we're in this interesting time where we do need to evolve no matter where we are geographically, and make sure that we get with the times. But I think the other part we're seeing as well, Rebel, is a lot more businesses that are taking more of a social impact or a community-based approach. And you mentioned that you decided to go down the cooperative route. What was the reason for doing that, Rebel, if you don't mind sharing? What was the driver for setting up your business in that way?
Well, I think one of the advantages, Jackson, of living in a little town, and I was born and raised in a rural community on a farm, and so it's basically my whole life have been in small rural communities, is that you see the challenges of legacy and succession front and center in every single business. But typically
Yes.
in rural areas, we really only talk about that in context of agricultural businesses or farms. So, it's like, who'll get the farm? That's the conversation. But we see this as a massive issue in rural businesses in the main streets as well, because people build these businesses over time. And like you've expressed and witnessed, they fall in love. They're there. They're serving their community wholeheartedly. And then it comes time for them to sell or, end. And it's like they can't sell because no one wants to buy. And because really, what are they selling? There's no systems or structures or, it's just like, I have a shop mostly. And it's been great. And I've got some books and maybe if you're lucky. And so succession and exit is a massive issue. And so I've been really cognizant of that with all of my businesses, and also as a starter of things and a pretty average continuer. My own skill set is definitely about setting things alight, getting them going, and then handing them over because I get really exhausted with the day-to-day. I realized very young I would have to come up with a model that would see me exit. And so when I started The Rural Woman, I only knew about companies, but I knew when I started it that it would eventually be owned by the community. I just didn't know what form that would take, but I knew it needed to be owned by the women that it served. And so I just spent years educating myself and looking at other models and studying and practicing, and eventually I've really settled on the cooperative model when I saw the kind of rise of platform cooperativism. So where the co-op movement was kind of starting to look and say, well, why don't we be the next Airbnb, or where is, the co-op version of Uber? And so I did some study with Mondragon, which is one of the world's largest co-ops, and realized that was the pathway that I could really see for our business. And in my own local community, I've also started facilitating conversations about what we're calling investor-activated community wealth building, where we're getting out ahead of this issue and starting to talk about, well, in a decade's time, I can see in my community there's going to be at least half a dozen, if not more, businesses that will want to exit one way or another for whatever their path is. But we need them to be thinking about that, planning for it and talking about it and getting a plan in place now, so that it's not this massive issue or this massive loss that everybody goes at once, and then all the intellectual property, all of those key businesses are lost to the community. And I'm really excited about looking at opportunities where the community could acquire those businesses as part of their legacy and succession. And so, it's like, for me, it's just always thinking like, how am I getting out of this thing I'm getting into? And in community development, I've seen so many consultants and, people come into our rural and regional communities where they put time in and then they leave. They build something great and then they leave after 2 or 3 years, and that really great thing disappears. And it's really tiring. It's emotionally devastating for communities. And I just think I don't want to be one of those people. So I don't want to be creating things in the world that leave a burden. And so I really want to work with people who understand that, and then, just want some support around that in their businesses, their enterprises, or their big ideas, for their legacy as well.
That's beautiful, mate. I think when we first connected on this and had a conversation about it, I kind of like had this light bulb moment. And look, I don't think many people have thought about this. I think many people in business overall, doesn't matter where they are, they're focused on the short term. They're trying to stay alive, right? They're trying to keep the business kicking on. And I think particularly in these rural communities, like perseverance is the common thread, because it's challenging. It's a challenging environment. It's both from a geographical standpoint, but also from a business environment standpoint. The personalities, they do everything with sheer grit and determination. And I think that lends us to being very short-term focused and not thinking about the big picture. But then on the flip side here, Revel, I observe a lot of, NGOs who get involved in this space from a very social standpoint, but they don't have that business nous, the commerciality to bring to the table, where we try and find this balance between good business sense and creating this legacy and this long-term impact. And I think you've brought this together really, really well. So credit to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jackson. I think that was the other bugbear, I guess, that I was like looking to engineer a solution to, and that was the sheer number of not-for-profits in Australia. Like, the number is ridiculous in terms of the serviceability of our population size. And I've seen so many women, particularly in my coaching, my early coaching years in business, where they can't get their business to work commercially. So they think,
Yeah.
I'll become a not-for-profit. And so I'm like, but if you're a not-for-profit and you can't commercialize your business, your only customer is going to be government. And
Yes.
if you're reliant on the government, you're going to be reliant on a government 3-year cycle endlessly for the rest of your life. And that's fine if it's one stream of your business income, but it's not going to work if that's your sole bread and butter. And so I realized this was an issue. And so very clearly when I was engineering my exit from the early days, I'm like, I know what I don't want to be. And I know I don't want to be a typical not-for-profit. And so, I had to work out business models and structures that would be able to be commercialized and scalable, and where government could be one of your customers, but not your only customer. And so I think the co-op now has this really beautiful hybrid model where we've got, state, federal, local government, some corporates as customers, but we also have a B2C model that's growing as well. And the two, work in synergy together. And so while it's a non-distributive co-op, it operates as a business that has advocacy as one of the things that it does, because that's basically what I did from the very beginning. And I thought, to go into social enterprise or to go into a not-for-profit because you can't make a business work is the wrong reason to go into that model.
It's bloody hard. I've been involved with a number of not-for-profits over the years in a consultative basis, and it's actually harder to commercialize a not-for-profit than it is to commercialize a for-profit business, because there's a certain stigma around it, that people view it differently, and they see it as a far more discretionary, charity-based thing than a commercial organization. So in many cases, non-for-profits have it much harder than a for-profit business. And this is why I really like the balance of this social enterprise, right? You have a great commercial business and you give back with the surplus proceeds that you have available. So it's kind of best of both worlds, right?
It is. And I think the other thing that was interesting to me, because we partnered with the university to do a kind of comprehensive research while we were getting ready to start the transition to this new model. And what was really interesting, though, Jackson, and this may be a rural, urban anomaly, or it might just be a community, sort of mindset. But the research the university found was very clearly that me being a sole founder was actually a barrier for people to buy. And that our audience, our community, perceived that if it was collectively owned or a not-for-profit or a model like that, that they would be more likely to buy. And that was like shocking to me, because to be honest, I felt like that was the tall poppy in data. It kind of had moved this anecdotal thing that, we'll support people, but only to a point. And at what point does that, so it's like we're almost like waiting for people we're like, will they make it? And if they make it, we'll get on board. And if they don't, we won't. But if they're a not-for-profit, they must be just in it for everybody else. And so, okay, we'll go in. And that it really showed me where the mindset of the community was. And so validated the decision, that my gut decision that it needed to be owned by the community. But it also made me realize just how even bloody harder it is to be an entrepreneur in a rural community and a woman. And these were other women too, who loved me, by the way, who were peers and colleagues and supporters, but still that existed. And so, it's just interesting to understand where the landscape that we're operating is. If you know it, you can work with it. And if you don't, then you're pushing up against brick walls that you don't even know exist, or you don't know why they're there. And often we start to blame ourselves and think we're the ones that are the problem, but it's not
And
always.
look, it's all about finding the right data to validate your perspective as opposed to making assumptions. So I think that's a really important point. So Rebel, let's talk about the future. What's the future look like for you, and where to next with the co-op and your business journey?
Well, the co-op's just going from strength to strength. And so I'm excited as the chairperson to be able to be less operational. We've got a great team coming into place. And so hoping that I'll be able to step into more of that advocacy work, really seeing the advancement of rural women and girls and helping the co-op to really achieve that mission. We had some policy that we put together a couple of years ago that was taken to the last federal election by the Greens. And so really want to start doing a lot more of that work that sees us start to reduce some more of those structural and systemic barriers that rural women and girls face. And from a business point of view, I've always got multiple startups on the go. But I'm really excited, Jackson, to do more of this work in legacy work with enterprises, business owners that are at a phase or a stage in their career where they're wanting to bring their next great life work to the fore, or they're wanting to really structure and build their business towards an exit, whatever that might look like, whether it's familial or sale, or as I've done, like a really beautiful community exit. So that we have a company called Bowerbirds that's really sort of kind of finding its way in that space, which has been modeled on the bowerbird that we've been hanging out with in our backyard for a long time, and the lessons that it's been teaching us about reciprocity and generosity and, the beauty of bright, shiny objects and having lots of bright, shiny objects in a bower. Maybe we'll work with enterprises who have got money but no ideas, or we work with people who have got big ideas but don't have the capacity to bring them to life. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I love living in Lightning Ridge. We've got a beautiful social enterprise here. We're just about to retrofit a performance space on our property into a recording studio so young people can come and start laying down some tracks. We've got a podcast project happening so we can start to amplify the voices of the youth in our community and reconnect them to performance and, help them build their confidence as humans. So there's always lots of beautiful projects on the go, both globally and for me very much locally, as well as really trying to build that community wealth building in our local area so that our young people own their future in their local town as well.
I love it, mate. I think you're doing phenomenal work, and I'm excited to continue to watch the journey. So, Rebel, if you had to distill all of your collective genius and experience into one last tip for our listeners, what would that one tip be?
There's a couple. One is that all the answers lie within, and that is at a personal level, we have our own answers. At a community level, our communities have our answers, and I believe at a national level that the answers for our community, our country, often lie at the heartland, at the heartland communities that we very rarely hear from. And the other is a Gandhi quote that always comes to mind, and that is, "Be the change you want to see in the world." It's really easy to live and be frustrated. And I know that as a, very passionate person in a very small town, the frustration is real. But if I come back to being the change that I want to see and leading from that place, then the only person I can be frustrated with is myself if I'm not seeing change. And I'm the only person that I can really truly influence anyway. So it brings all of the power back to you to be able to influence and lead in a more effective way. So that's my gift.
That's beautiful, mate. You've summarised it perfectly. So if anybody's listened to this or watched this and they've loved what you've had to say as much as I have, Rebel, how are they best to get in touch with you?
I've got a few sort of sites. They can reach out to me through rebelblack.com or through bowerbirds.com. Both of those links will find me, or just search me out on LinkedIn or Facebook. I love connecting with people.
Amazing. We'll include all the links in the show notes. As always, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I'm super excited to continue to watch the journey. So, guys, make sure you jump onto those links. And just remember, a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you put it into practice. And we will catch you on the next episode. Rebel, thanks again. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Jackson.